to discuss another topic which we have not yet touched upon in terms of rural transformation and food system. We just started talking about it with Maury, but more specifically looking at coffee. Now we're going to look at forestry. And I invite you to follow the new project lab, which was set up for this particular session. And how can we help regreening Africa? How can we implement a badly needed land restoration? To take us through this panel, it's my pleasure to hand over to Lee Vinoviecky, who is going to be the moderator. Hello, Lee.
Hello, thank you so much, Florence. It is great to be here. A big, warm welcome to all participants to our session, Regreening Africa, Restoring Degraded Land for People and Nature. Now let's get started. We want to see who is in the room. Please go to Slido. Here are the instructions. We would like to know which of the following best describes your organization. For example, are you representing a government, a donor, private sector, research? We want to see who's engaging with us here today. While we are waiting for the poll results, we would also like to make this as interactive as possible. So please use the chat to answer the following question. What role do you think restoration should play in supporting enhanced livelihoods and ecosystems in Africa? This will help us frame the starting point for the session. So please answer the Slido and engage in the chat. As we know, land degradation affects 25% of the Earth's surface and negatively impacts 3.2 billion people globally. This session will emphasize regreening action on the ground, showcasing engagement with farmers to tailor restoration efforts that meet their needs. These farmer-led innovations, including the integration of trees to regreen the Sahel, aims to increase productivity of the land, enhance biodiversity, and address climate change, while also increasing economic opportunities for men, women, and youth. We have 3 distinguished panelists to highlight these various aspects, followed by Q&A. So let's get started. I have the pleasure to introduce Mieke, BOURNE, Regreening Africa Program Manager. If we could please see the slides, and Mieke will take it away. Over to you, Mieke.
Thank you so much, Lee. And I wonder, was there a Slido result just before I get started? I'd love to see who we're talking to today. And maybe we'll come back to that at the end of the session. So if the slides could come up, that would be fantastic. Wonderful. And if you can just go to the next slide and then the slide after that. Thank you. And so on to my first slide, I think if you can just go to the next slide, land degradation, as Lee just pointed out, is a very huge global challenge. So land degradation, what do we mean when we say that? It's the loss or deterioration of a land's productive capacity. And this can be taking place through erosion of soil, pollution of water, removal of vegetation. So land degradation is a really global challenge. The economics of land degradation estimated the loss of ecosystem services through degradation cost us $10 trillion globally every year. Can you just imagine the cost of that? And in Africa, over 65% of the agricultural land is already degraded. So could you please go to the next slide? And this is what is calling for the need for huge investment and upscaling of land restoration, so reversing this degradation process. And just recently, just a few weeks ago, the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration was launched. This was a huge momentum and brings huge investment into restoration, which is very critically needed. Now, restoration is very, very important because it addresses biodiversity loss, climate change mitigation and adaptation, and improving rural livelihoods. It also supports investments such as the Great Green Wall in Africa and the Green Deal objectives. And within this huge investment in restoration, there's also a great need to be guided by good information, good evidence, and therefore action in the strategy is investing in research. If you could just go to the next slide. Within Regreening Africa, our approach to this is looking at research in development. So all that means is bringing together the very different people, the different groups that work on restoration, the researchers, the donors, the development practitioners, to look at the information from the community, from science, from development partners, and bring that into the process so that we're informed by evidence in our work, in our future investments, and in our policy. Next slide, please. Now, Regreening Africa, I'd like to just touch a little bit on that, as that's the session focus. Regreening Africa is a very, very ambitious program. It's a 5-year program funded by the European Union, and it aims to reverse land degradation across 1 million hectares of land in 8 sub-Saharan African countries, which you can see on the screen, and to benefit up to 500,000 households. The program aims to achieve this by incorporating trees into crop, communal, and pastoral lands, combined with complementary restoration practices. And I'll show a few of those on the next slide, please. So the practices are very varied, and this is because the land that we work in and the people that we're working with are also very varied. So the program covers from East to West Africa. So for example, in the drier areas in the Sahel, in Senegal, Niger, Mali, and Ghana, we're focusing a lot on something called farmer-managed natural regeneration. So instead of planting trees, we're using the naturally regenerating shrubs, tree stumps, and pruning them to bring back greenery in the landscape. This is very effective because it brings back the indigenous, the local vegetation, as well as is more resilient when there's drought or low rainfall. Another key practice is soil and water conservation. In Niger, it was very, very evident that without the soil and water conservation, the regreening or restoration process would not be as successful. In Ethiopia, exclosures or enclosures are a very big part of the restoration process. They restrict access into an area to allow the natural vegetation to come back. But we also look at tree planting, particularly in countries like Rwanda, where the smaller area of land means that people that when they're looking at restoring green into their landscape, they want to bring back trees that are of high value. So a lot of planting of trees that are linked to value chains. But also in the drier areas, there's certain species or certain types of trees that people want to bring because of their high value. And then we often look at things like grafting in situ or in place so that we can bring back these high value trees. And of course, very quality nurseries ought to also support the tree planting. These practices then combine with elements around governance. So who owns the land, who has access to the tree resources or the resources that come up, as well as looking at value chains. So how is there a livelihood outcome beyond the products that people can collect directly into their households? So on to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, Regreening Africa primarily focuses on implementation, but it also has this learning and research component, and so it has a unique and very effective program structure. There is a research element and technical support and very quality monitoring, but a very strong implementation component within the map that you can see, many NGOs working on the program, national oversight that links the program to the government, to the priorities, to the programs, and to sustainability, as well as general oversight from the European Union and a steering committee. On to the next slide, please. So Regreening Africa really offers a huge opportunity in terms of scaling. By the end of our 3rd year, which was in September last year, we'd already reached almost 300,000 households and over 400,000 hectares. And this is very important. Obviously, the restoration process is incremental. Not all of those places would look fully restored within 1 year, but this process is now underway in a very large area. The program also offers us a huge opportunity in terms of learning because of the variety of countries, sites, and contexts. Next slide, please. And so the program is collecting a lot of information and evidence to inform both this project and the implementation, as well as future projects and investments in restoration. So these are just some of the areas. And I just want to touch on two quickly before we go into a deep dive in Niger. Next slide, please. So one of the really innovative tools being developed through the program is the Regreening Africa app. I encourage you to download it off the Google Play Store. We'll also be putting some links in the chat where you can get more information. This is used by implementing partners, lead farmers, and others on the ground. It is geo-referenced. And we are then able to, next slide, I think it's 2 clicks, next and then next again. And we're able to bring the information that comes out of the app that's geo-referenced with very high quality land health maps through the land degradation surveillance framework. And this gives us an insight of not only where we're doing our restoration, our regreening, but the impacts that are biophysical. And then we use surveys to understand the livelihood impacts and some of the other outcomes of this restoration. We are making all of this information available through decision dashboards that will be online in the coming months to inform future investment in these countries as well as this program. And the next slide, please. We're also conducting regular uptake surveys. These are very important because in a program with such ambitious targets, we need to make sure that our scaling models, so the way that we're reaching out to farmers and community, are effective, because we need to be able to reach many, many farmers, many, many households, many pastoralists, and we need to also make sure that there's adoption of these practices to bring around the restoration or the reversing of land degradation that we aim to. And so these surveys give us an indication if we're on the right track, and we use them for adaptive management and for planning. Next slide, please. We have a process by which we bring in the information that comes out of the different studies from the field, from the donor perspective and the country, to adaptively manage and improve the planning process. I won't have time to go into it in detail, but there'll be links for that in the chat, and you can look into more about the joint reflective and learning mission approach. Next slide, please. So the last point I wanted to touch on is how we engage in the policy process. The enabling environment, or the policies, the processes, the rules, the regulations, the way the resources are managed at the local level are very critical for the adoption of restoration practices and for agroforestry. And there's a few examples on the screen, but just to touch that in Niger, we supported FMNR decree, which gives greater user rights. And in Ghana, we're supporting the Northern Restoration Plan. In Somalia, looking at FMNR into policy processes. And to my last slide, please. So just to wrap up, I just wanted to leave some key messages. I hope that we've outlined that land degradation is a global and a very serious threat, and that restoration and regreening is very important and has both livelihood and environmental benefits. We need to ensure that we're embedding co-learning into the process. So we're bringing in the evidence, we're learning as we go, and we need to be looking at programs that have been successful and also that have failed to inform our future efforts. And with that, I'd like to pass back to Lee. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Mieke. Wow. Restoring 1 million hectares across 8 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. I would now like to introduce Ahmed Chibozo, who is calling in from Niamey and is the Regreening Africa project coordinator for World Vision Niger, to showcase just how this restoration is taking place by engaging with farmers and communities in these drylands. Ahmed, over to you.
Bonjour, je suis Ahmed Constantin Chibozo. Je suis chargé de programme World Vision Niger pour la zone de Walam et cumulativement coordinateur du projet Regreening Africa au Niger. Slide, please. Next slide. Donc, le programme Regreening Africa au Niger est particulièrement mis en œuvre dans la région de Tillabéri, et ce sur 3 communes. Nous avons la commune de Walam, la commune de Simiri et la commune de Hamdallah, où sont implémentées les activités du programme. Et nous sommes 2 partenaires d'exécution, World Vision Niger qui est en charge de la commune de Walam et de Simiri, et Care International qui est en charge des activités de la commune de Hamdallah. Et nous avons aussi le partenaire GIZ qui est en charge de la composante 1 qui traite de l'économie de la dégradation des terres et le partenaire ICRAF qui supporte les 8 pays dans la mise en œuvre des activités. Nous avons aussi des partenaires stratégiques avec lesquels nous collaborons. C'est les différents ministères sectoriels, le ministère de l'Agriculture, de l'Environnement et le ministère de l'Élevage aussi. Nous collaborons aussi avec les instituts de recherche et de formation, notamment l'Université de Niamey, l'Université de Maradi, de Tillabéri, Agrimet, l'INRAN, ICRISAT. Nous avons aussi des ONG tant nationales qu'internationales avec qui nous collaborons, étant dans le même domaine d'intervention. On peut citer le PAM, Islamic Relief, WinRock, les jeunes volontaires pour l'environnement, et on ne finira pas de citer les collectivités, les mairies avec lesquelles nous collaborons étroitement, et aussi les leaders d'opinion qui sont les leaders coutumiers et religieux. Next slide, please. Notre objectif aujourd'hui, c'est de faire de la RNA une pratique qui aujourd'hui a démontré ses résultats et qui est la moins coûteuse au monde. C'est de mettre à l'échelle cette pratique de la RNA et prétendre restaurer nos écosystèmes et nos différents environnements. Donc cela ne se fera pas sans une gouvernance locale accrue. Et on ambitionne d'impliquer 40 000 producteurs de ménages sur une superficie d'environ 90 000 hectares. Next, please. Autre objectif du programme pour le cas du Niger, c'est comment renforcer la gestion sur les ressources naturelles en milieu rural. Et cela ne se fera pas sans le renforcement des capacités de nos différentes communautés, des producteurs et des productrices, et renforcer aussi leur résilience face aux différents chocs climatiques. Et on entend aussi booster l'économie au niveau local à travers des activités génératrices de revenus qui font le lien avec le développement des chaînes de valeur issues des produits de l'agroforesterie. Et tout ceci aussi en boostant un peu la sécurité alimentaire et nutritionnelle de nos communautés. Next slide, please. Nos principales activités, je l'ai dit tantôt, c'est la RNA, la régénération naturelle assistée, qui aujourd'hui nous essayons de mettre à l'échelle dans nos différentes zones d'intervention. Nous amenons aussi les communautés à implémenter là où est possible des pépinières villageoises. Nous savons tous que dans le contexte du Niger, dans la zone d'intervention, nous avons des poches de zones où la RNA n'est pas praticable, tout simplement parce qu'il n'y a pas de rejet. Et donc, nous faisons recours aussi à des plantations d'enrichissement. Donc, nous avons impliqué une grande frange des populations, c'est la couche féminine, les femmes. Et donc, il y a des activités spécifiques qui sont menées dans ce sens pour impliquer cette frange-là. Et c'est la promotion et l'utilisation des foyers améliorés qui, aujourd'hui, a apporté ces résultats, qui fait économiser la consommation.
Great, and thank you so much, Ahmed, for demonstrating how you're working with communities and farmers to really showcase context-specific restoration results. And just to highlight that some of the activities that Ahmed was talking about was farmer-managed natural regeneration, nursery management, tree planting, and grafting. So with that, I would like to ask Adsiri, could you show us the results of the first Slido poll of who is in the room? Remember, some of the answers were around government, private sector, research, and I think we can see we have a very nice mixture of research, donors, and development actors. Wow. And I think that this is what we're trying to do, is have these conversations across multiple stakeholders. And that also means that our language is very important, that we're speaking so that we can all understand. So thanks again to Ahmed for that vivid sense of how the project is engaging on the ground in Niger. Now, I have the pleasure to introduce Bernard Crabe, the head of Sector Environment and Circular Economy at INTPA at the European Commission. Please go ahead, Bernard. We'd love to hear from you and get your perspective on this program.
Thank you, Lian, and thank you, Mieke. Thank you, Ahmed, for this very inspiring presentation that we just had. Basically, it's very nice to see that indeed this project is not about intention or ideas. It's really about action in the field, about action at community level, at the grassroots. So, and I am very impressed to hear about the achievements so far. So 420,000 hectares restored or being restored, and 300,000 households. That's quite an achievement, and I really would like to highlight this. And these are the reasons why the EU is a proud supporter of this Regreening Africa program. I just heard this morning that new climate predictions, according to the World Meteorological Organization, say that we are likely to reach a 1.5 degree increase of global temperature in the next 5 years, at least temporarily. And this is quite a concern, of course, and this underlines the need to quickly move into action, and action at scale. And that's exactly what we are trying to promote through this program. Let me first say a word on the Green Deal. Well, for the reasons that you have explained, I think land is really at the core of the European Green Deal. It is essential to achieve climate neutrality and climate resilience, climate adaptation. And as you know, climate neutrality is the headline ambition of the European Green Deal. It is also an essential and central element of our Farm to Fork strategy, the EU Farm to Fork strategy, which is the component of the Green Deal that focuses on sustainable agricultural and food systems. And last but not least, of course, it is crucial to halt biodiversity loss in line with the ambition of the EU biodiversity strategy adopted last year. So just to inform you, this biodiversity strategy is not simply an intention. We are actively working these days to develop a biodiversity restoration law for Europe, which would establish binding targets for the conservation and restoration of key ecosystems. So the EU is actively rolling out the European Green Deal, and this Green Deal is an important international dimension. The EU, of course, recognizes that to tackle global challenges like climate change, biodiversity loss, we need strong international partnerships. And so the EU is actively working with partners to set the foundations for ambitious global agreements on climate change in Glasgow later this year, and in Kunming on biodiversity. We want to reach an ambitious global agreement with a headline ambition on biodiversity to ensure that by 2050, all of the world's ecosystems are restored, resilient, and adequately protected. In this endeavor, in this huge endeavor, Africa, of course, is a priority. Africa, as you highlighted, is probably the continent worst affected by land degradation. And this in a context of quickly growing population. According to the UN, Africa's population is expected to double in the coming 30 years to reach 2.5 billion people by 2050. And if current trends are not tamed, possibly 4 billion by 2100. This is huge. And so this means that Africa's food feed and fiber production will need to increase to meet the needs of a quickly expanding population. In the past, production increase in Africa has been achieved by an expansion of cultivated areas. This is no more feasible if we want to avoid catastrophic impacts on the climate, on biodiversity, and on development itself and in the end. So we need to intensify sustainable land management. To promote it, we need to promote land restoration. This will be critical to meet the needs of Africa's population, increasing the yields and sustaining them. The good news in all this is that we have successful stories from Niger and Ethiopia, and Ahmed really showcased the story of Niger that is extremely inspiring. And this shows us that land restoration can be achieved at scale, allowing communities and economies to thrive while protecting nature and fighting climate change. This all makes that recently our President of the Commission, President Ursula von der Leyen, has made a bold commitment to support Africa's Great Green Wall Initiative, and to support this through the EU programs in the region in the next 5 years. Of course, this was a recognition of the importance of this initiative, not only for climate change and biodiversity, but primarily for development, for ensuring food security, agricultural development, jobs, and at the end, stability and security. And this in a region, the Sahelian region, in a region of strategic importance for Europe. How do we intend to support this Great Green Wall Initiative? Well, we are strongly convinced that in line with the subsidiarity principle, land issues are best addressed at the local level, at the grassroots, and through integrated approaches, driven by communities and smallholder farmers, herdsmen, forest dwellers, because they are obviously the custodians of the land and they are the driving force for sustainable land management. But of course, local communities will not do land restoration for the sake of preserving biodiversity or sequestering carbon. I think to succeed, we are convinced that land restorations needs to be anchored in local development dynamics and need to generate, of course, benefits to the farmers. So this is why we are committed, the EU, to support the Great Green Wall Initiative. And this support will take the form of a mosaic of locally owned initiatives that will be part of our broader cooperation program with partner countries from Somalia to Senegal. And we will focus on a number of sectors in line with the Great Green Wall Accelerator: agriculture, agroecology, agroforestry, and the value chains that are linked to that, including tree-based value chain. We will support the conservation and restoration of high-value ecosystems in biodiversity-rich areas through the Nature Africa initiative. Governance as well. Land governance is key to ensure sustainable land management, so this will be another focus of our action. And finally, energy should not be overlooked. Promoting alternative sources of energy is key in a region where wood consumption is a key driver of deforestation. And of course, I should mention that our land restoration support will not be limited to the Great Green Wall countries, but will also support other countries, like illustrated by the Regreening Africa program. Finally, I would say that we don't want to reinvent the wheel in all this. I think the Great Green Wall Initiative and other land restoration efforts in the framework of this decade need to build on past successes and take inspiration. And so Niger, Ethiopia, Senegal have all restored areas at scale, and the Regreening Africa has been an active supporter of these efforts. We need to base ourselves on these success stories and to scale them up. We need as well, I think, to use the tools that are available, and I'm really impressed by the tools that were developed under the Regreening Africa program. The use of digital technologies to help farmers in the field. That's quite amazing, and that's really 21st century developments. The use of Earth observation technologies will be essential to guide and monitor progress on the Great Green Wall. So we are very much willing to work with the organization, the World Agroforestry Center, and the NGOs involved in Regreening Africa to continue building on this success and make the Great Green Wall a reality. So thanks, Leanne, and over to you.
Great. Thank you, Bernard, for these inspiring words and for reminding us that land is a great connector for achieving climate change, biodiversity, and restoration goals. And thank you to all of the presenters for this thorough and fascinating examples of implementing farmer-centered approaches that encourage innovations to meet farmer needs while also generating livelihood benefits. We would really love to hear from the audience and gather more feedback. So please send your questions. We have received about 15 already. So let's get started. Bernard, you mentioned that this is a global initiative, but you did mention the Great Green Wall. So I would like to ask Ahmed, as he's based in Niger, what specific lessons can be brought from regreening into the Great Green Wall? Which aspects? And we didn't see all of your slides, but in one of your slides, you had a long list of cooperating initiatives from AFAR 100 to the Great Green Wall. So please, what lessons can be shared from Regreening Africa to the Great Green Wall and these initiatives? Ahmed?
Merci, Lee. Alors, l'Alliance de la Grande Muraille Verte, une initiative assez intéressante et qui aujourd'hui a beaucoup d'opportunités pour le cas du Niger, des opportunités sur lesquelles cette alliance peut aussi s'appuyer et ainsi donc atteindre les objectifs qu'elle s'est fixés. Donc, pour le cas de Regreening, qui aujourd'hui a pour faire de lance renforcer la gouvernance locale sur la gestion des ressources humaines, renforcer les communautés pour non seulement avoir cette appropriation de la planification de toutes les activités qui doivent être menées en termes de restauration des terres, en termes de reverdissement. Et ça, c'est une opportunité sur laquelle nous pensons que la Grande Muraille Verte peut construire ses activités. Nous avons aussi remarqué depuis quelques années qu'il y a un engouement des différents partenaires et différents acteurs qui interviennent dans les questions de reverdissement. Et cela constitue aussi une grande opportunité pour ce grand mouvement de la Grande Muraille Verte. Il faudrait quand même souligner qu'il y a, en dépit des efforts qui sont fournis, un manque de coordination des différentes interventions de tous ces partenaires-là, de ces nombreux acteurs-là qui interviennent. Et nous pensons que l'État est en train de prendre les dispositions pour améliorer cette coordination, d'où nous l'avons souligné dans la présentation. Un très bon début, c'est déjà la mise en place là, de ce décret sur la RNA qui nous montre un peu l'engagement des autorités et des décideurs pour le Niger. Donc nous pensons très très bien que la Grande Muraille Verte peut valablement atteindre les objectifs qui lui ont été assignés, hein, mais cela en se basant sur les cas de succès qui ont été un peu enregistrés par-ci par-là. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Ahmed. It looks like there's a lot we can learn from Regreening Africa project. Next question, Mieke, is coming to you, and I'm trying to combine a number of questions that have come in the Q&A, but the theme of these questions is, in your presentation, you mentioned tailoring restoration options to the local conditions, and that includes rights of communities and the farmers. So what and how does the project consider the local context and adapting these restoration options? Over to you, Mieke.
Thank you so much, Lee. And as I mentioned at the beginning, Regreening Africa obviously covers a number of countries. And within each of these countries, there is so much diversity in the people, in the landscapes. So Critical to mention is that restoration is undertaken by the people that live and manage the land. They are the ones that make the decisions about what is restored and how it happens in a number of the cases and in the sustainability of that. And that includes men, women, youth, different groups. So adapting to the local context and the local situation is critical. From our perspective, we should be coming with options that the community can locally adapt, options that can be taken into the local context, but also looking at a range of things. The options we bring in terms of restoration must have benefits to the community in terms of products. So this might be firewood, it might be improved productivity of the land, greater water retention, etc. It also must have livelihood elements. Can we link a value chain to it? Is there something that we can bring that will bring greater benefits to the community from the practice? And also we need to have a look at the longer term and at the governance elements, which I think I mentioned in brief. But these governance elements may come from the national level, but they're also at the local level. And I hope the Hamed will also add on some of these parts that are really, really critical at the local level. So when we're working with a community, we have to listen to what it is, the challenges that they face and the challenges as they are different between men, women, youth, and different communities. We need to see the practices that could apply. We need to support in terms of capacity. And then we bring in some of the science and the monitoring so we can feedback on how things are progressing and also share those experiences with a broader community to see the progress that is taking place. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you, Mieke. That was very informative. And we are getting a lot of questions now, so I'm going to try and get through them as many as we can. Bernard Crabe, you mentioned that massive amounts of investments are needed to really reach these restoration goals. So can you perhaps discuss how to unlock investments in land restoration?
Thank you, Lian. And this is indeed a very important question. Development aid, of course, will not be sufficient to support the scale of investment that will be needed. We need to, of course, mobilize national budgets, but this also will not be sufficient. We need first and foremost to unlock investments by the private sector, we believe. And when I talk about private sector, I am not talking about the multinationals. I'm really talking about the large number of smallholder farmers, cooperatives, micro, small and medium enterprises, including women entrepreneurs, and foresters and so on. So we need definitely conducive policies. I think that is one of the success of the Regreening Africa project, is to look at the bottlenecks that hinder investment in sustainable land management. The policies need to provide incentives. Of course, very importantly, we need to provide security of land tenure and robust land governance. This is key to secure investment in land restoration that by nature are long-term investments. We need to make the case for investment, definitely, meaning that we need to have cost-effective solutions. And I think the program is showcasing a number of cost-effective solutions like FMNR, agroforestry, agroecology. And we need to demonstrate that investing in land restoration makes economic sense. So demonstrating return on investments. I think there is a lot of evidence. We have worked with Regreening Africa as well and GIZ under the economics of land degradation component to show that investments in land restoration generate economic benefits. Very important as well, I think experience tells us that access to markets for product is key. When we want to promote sustainable intensification of production, so we want farmers to invest in their field, they need to have a secure access to markets that give them a return for their project. Finally, well, probably a lot of value chains can pull this effort into land restoration. I guess we need to promote these value chains through value chain approaches. I think you have mentioned some of these value chains, Moringa, Shea, Gum Arabica, and so on, that are very promising in terms of incentivizing land restoration effort. And last but not least, I think, and that's where development money can help. We need to attract finance and to these regions that are hard to reach, and to these actors, the small and medium farmers that are hard to reach as well. So that's where we can use European money, and that's a big part of our future programs, to de-risk investment, so to cover some of the risk of investing into these regions and into smallholder farming, blending ODA with private and public investment. So these are a few of the areas we want to work on to ensure that we unlock indeed private investment into land restoration.
Thank you, Bernard. That is wonderful to hear, and especially the commitment of the EU on this. And of course, a key element in de-risking investments is building the evidence base around what restoration options work where. So there were a lot of questions in the chat about this Regreening Africa app and how farmers are using this. Ahmed, we only have 1 minute. Could you please highlight your experience in Niger with using this app and how the partners are engaging with this data collection tool? Ahmed, thank you.
Merci, Lee. Alors, l'application Regreening Apps, une innovation assez intéressante qui aujourd'hui fait le lien entre le monde rural et le développement qui va à grande vitesse aujourd'hui. Dans le contexte du Niger, vous savez que dans notre zone d'intervention, il y a cette insécurité grandissante et cela souvent empêche aux équipes de suivi et évaluation d'aller sur le terrain, faire le suivi et aussi collecter des données. Donc à travers cette application, nous avons cette grande opportunité de pouvoir former des agents locaux dans tous les villages où nous intervenons et nous les dotons de smartphones. Et à travers ces agents de collecte, nous arrivons sur la base de cette application à collecter les données de réalisation dans le cadre du projet. Cela nous amène à recevoir des feedbacks tout de suite sur un tableau de bord qui renseigne sur l'avancée des activités au niveau du terrain. C'est une innovation et c'est très, très intéressant. Nous avons des doléances au niveau des différents partenaires, tant les ONG locales, les ONG internationales et même les agents des services techniques, les agents de l'État, pour que cette application soit utilisée dans divers projets et dans d'autres zones au-delà de la région de Tillabéri. Voilà, merci.
Voila, merci beaucoup, Ahmed. My French is improving by the minute. So really, I just would like to thank everyone for joining this session. And as Mieke has reminded me, there are a lot of unanswered questions. So please reach out to us. We would love to respond to you via email if you want to share your email. Otherwise, please visit our website, regreening.org. But just to wrap up, let me just say a huge thank you for everyone. We can see the momentum for restoration of ecosystems is growing, and Regreening Africa is really part of this initiative. And we hope you are as motivated as we are to collaborate and scale ecosystem restoration to unlock the investments needed, highlighted by Bernard, to really bring the multiple benefits. We have a final slide on the key messages, and I'll just read them for you here. That restoration and regreening has livelihood and environmental benefits. That embedding co-learning into the development process enhances impact and allows for this adaptation for scaling farmer innovative restoration on their farm, and that lessons and approaches drawn from successes and failures should inform future scaling efforts, as Bernard highlighted. So with that, please reach out to us and visit regreening.org for more details. And over to Florence back in the studio.